Marcus had always been the kind of student who questioned everything. At 20 years old, studying history at London University, he spent most of his free time reading about royal traditions and ceremonies. His friends often joked that he knew more about the British monarchy than the Queen herself. On a crisp autumn morning, Marcus decided to visit Buckingham Palace. He had been there many times before, but today was different. Today, he had a theory he wanted to test. He had read countless books about the royal guards and their training, and he was convinced that their famous stoic behavior was just an act. There. Just regular people in fancy uniforms, Marcus had told his roommate the night before. I bet I can make one of them break character if I try hard enough. His roommate had laughed and shook his head. Marcus, those guards are trained professionals. They've stood through rain, snow, tourists, and everything else. What makes you think you can get a reaction? But Marcus was determined. He'd studied psychology and human behavior, and he believed everyone had a breaking point. As he walked through the morning crowds toward the palace, his mind was already working on different strategies. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus approached the famous red-coated guards. Tourists were already gathering, taking photos and chatting excitedly. Marcus observed the guards carefully, noting their perfect posture and unwavering gaze. He chose his target carefully, a young guard who looked to be about his own age. Standing at attention near the main gate, the guard's bearskin hat sat perfectly on his head, and his red uniform was immaculate.
That's my door.
His rifle was held at exactly the right angle, and his eyes stared straight ahead. Seeing everything but acknowledging nothing, Marcus started with simple tactics. He stood directly in front of the guard and began making funny faces. Tourists around him giggled and pointed, but the guard remained motionless. Marcus tried waving his arms, doing a little dance, and even attempting some terrible jokes told. Loudly enough for the guard to hear, nothing worked. The guard stood like a statue, completely unmoved by Marcus's antics. As the morning wore on, Marcus became more creative. He borrowed a small mirror from a tourist and tried reflecting sunlight. Toward the guard's face, being careful not to aim it directly at his eyes, he attempted to start conversations about the weather, compliments about the uniform, and even tried asking for directions in various accents. The other tourists were now watching Marcus as much as they were watching the guard. Some found his attempts amusing, while others seemed annoyed by his persistence. A few older visitors shook their heads disapprovingly.
I'd made muttering about young people today and showing proper respect.
But Marcus was just getting started. He had expected the basic attempts to fail. They were just his warm-up. He had spent weeks researching the guards' training and protocols, and he had some more sophisticated ideas in mind as noon approached. The crowd around the palace grew larger. School groups arrived with excited children, tour buses dropped off visitors from around the world, and the usual mix of locals and tourists filled the courtyard. Marcus realized he had a larger audience for his experiment, which both excited and pressured him. He decided to step up his game. From his backpack, he pulled out a small notebook and began pretending to be a serious researcher. He started interviewing tourists about their impressions of the guards, speaking loudly enough for his target guard to hear every word. Fascinating, Marcus said to an elderly couple from Germany. So you believe the guards are actually paying attention to their surroundings? My research suggests they might just be daydreaming about their lunch. The German couple looked confused but played along politely. Meanwhile, Marcus kept one eye on the guard, looking for any tiny reaction, a twitch of the mouth, a shift in posture, even a slight change in breathing pattern. Still nothing. The guard remained as still and professional as ever. Marcus was beginning to feel frustrated, but he wasn't ready to give up. He had one more hour before he needed to head back to university for his afternoon lectures. One more hour to prove his theory that everyone could be made to react if you just found the right approach. Little did Marcus know that his experiment had not gone unnoticed by others. The palace security had been quietly observing his activities, and his chosen guard had been trained for exactly this type of situation. What Marcus thought was a simple test of willpower was about to become a lesson he would never forget. As the clock tower chimed noon, Marcus prepared for his final, most ambitious attempt to break the royal guard's composure. He had saved his Best idea for last, confident that this time he would finally get the reaction he was looking for. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened his voice recorder app. He had decided to try a psychological approach that he had read about in one of his behavioral psychology textbooks. He would create a scenario that might trigger an emotional response through storytelling. Day 1 of my Royal Guard study, Marcus announced loudly, holding his phone like a professional reporter. I'm here to document the human side of these legendary figures. He began pacing back and forth in front of the guard, speaking in a clear, carrying voice that attracted the attention of nearby tourists. Many stopped to listen, thinking they were witnessing some kind of official documentary being filmed. What most people don't understand, Marcus continued, is that these guards are sons, brothers, fathers. They have families waiting for them. At home, they have dreams, fears, and hopes, just like everyone else. Marcus glanced at the guard, looking for any sign of recognition or emotion. The guard's expression remained unchanged, but Marcus thought he detected the slightest softening around the eyes. Encouraged, he continued, I wonder, Marcus mused aloud, what this particular guard thinks about while standing here for hours. Does he think about his girlfriend? His mother's cooking? The football match he's missing today? A small crowd had gathered around Marcus now, listening intently to his impromptu performance. Some tourists began taking photos of both Marcus and the guard. Creating an unusual scene that drew even more attention, Marcus decided to make his story more personal and emotional. He began weaving a tale about a fictional guard who had to miss his daughter's first birthday because of duty. He described the guard's internal struggle between professional obligation and personal desire, painting a picture of quiet heroism and sacrifice. And so he stands there, Marcus said dramatically, missing the most important moments of his life, all for the sake of tradition and duty. How many precious moments has this guard sacrificed? How many family dinners, birthday parties, or quiet evenings at home? For just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw something flicker across the guard's face. Was it emotion? Recognition? It was so brief that he couldn't be sure, but it gave him hope that his approach was working. Emboldened by this possible success, Marcus decided to push further. He began describing specific scenarios that might resonate with a young man of military age: missing friends' weddings, being away during holidays, the challenge of maintaining relationships while serving in such a demanding role, the crowd around. Marcus was growing larger and more engaged. Some visitors were wiping away tears at his emotional storytelling, while others were taking videos to share on social media. Marcus found himself genuinely moved by his own fictional narrative, adding authenticity to his performance. But then something unexpected happened. An older tourist, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, approached Marcus during a pause in his monologue. "Excuse me, young man," the older gentleman said in a crisp British accent. "Might I have a word with you?" Marcus paused his recording, slightly annoyed at the interruption but curious about what the man wanted to say. "Of course, sir. Are you enjoying the documentary?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a particularly warm smile. "I'm Colonel James Whitfield, retired. I served with the Household Division for 32 years, including 10 years as a Coldstream Guard right here at this very post." Marcus felt a sudden chill run down his spine, but he tried to maintain his confident demeanor. "Oh, how interesting. Then you must have insights into what I'm trying to document here." Colonel Whitfield nodded slowly. "Indeed I do. You see, son, I've been watching your little experiment for the past hour. I think there are some things you should know about. The young man you've chosen as your subject." The crowd around them had grown quiet, sensing that something important was about to happen. The guard remained motionless, but Marcus noticed that several other guards at nearby posts seemed to be paying closer attention to the conversation. "First," the colonel continued, "these guards undergo months of intensive training specifically designed to help them handle situations exactly like this. They've dealt with everything from crying babies to protesters to tourists who think they're the first person clever enough to try to break their concentration." Marcus felt his confidence beginning to waver, but he tried to maintain his academic stance. "Yes, but surely everyone has limits. Everyone has emotional triggers that can." Second, the colonel interrupted gently but firmly. "This particular guard that you've been focusing on, His name is Private Thompson. He lost his father in Afghanistan 3 years ago, and his mother is currently undergoing treatment for cancer. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The crowd around them gasped audibly, and several people looked at Marcus with expressions of shock and disapproval. Marcus felt his face burning with embarrassment and shame. So when you speak about missing family moments and sacrificing for duty, Colonel Whitfield continued, you're talking to someone who understands those concepts far better than most people ever will. Yet he stands there, doing his job with honor and dignity, despite personal challenges that would break lesser men. Marcus looked at the guard Private Thompson with completely different eyes now. What he had seen as a fun intellectual challenge suddenly felt cruel and invasive. He realized that his experiment had been based on the assumption that the guard's stoicism was artificial, when in reality, it might have been born from genuine strength and character. Forged through real hardship, the crowd began to disperse. Many people, shooting disapproving glances at Marcus as they walked away, stood there feeling smaller and more foolish than he ever had in his life, realizing that his clever psychology student theories had just been shattered by reality. Marcus stood frozen in place, his phone still in his hand, the recording app still running. The weight of Colonel Whitfield's words settled on him like a heavy blanket. Around him, the remaining tourists continued their sightseeing, but Marcus felt completely isolated in his shame and embarrassment. I didn't know, Marcus stammered, looking between the colonel and Private Thompson. It was supposed to be a harmless experiment about human psychology, and you turned another human being into a laboratory rat without his consent, Colonel Whitfield said. Voice neither angry nor kind, simply matter of fact. Tell me. Young man, what university do you attend? London University, Marcus replied quietly. I'm studying history and psychology. Colonel Whitfield nodded thoughtfully. Yes, then you should understand better than most that every person has a story. Every individual you encounter has lived through experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. Private Thompson. Here isn't just a figure in a uniform. He's a young man who chose to serve his country, despite personal tragedy. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he looked at Private Thompson again. The guard remained at attention, professional and dignified. But now Marcus could see something different in his bearing. What he had mistaken for robotic behavior now seemed like remarkable inner strength. How do you know so much about him? Marcus asked the colonel. Because I make it my business to know about the young men and women who serve in these positions, Colonel Whitfield replied. Private Thompson's father, Sergeant Major Thompson, served under me during 2 tours of duty. He was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to command. The revelation hit Marcus like another wave. Not only had he been trying to humiliate someone dealing with personal tragedy, but that person was the son of a war hero. His clever experiment suddenly seemed not just inappropriate, but deeply disrespectful. Private Thompson volunteered for this assignment, the colonel continued. After his father's death, he could have chosen an easier path. He could have left the military altogether. Instead, he requested to be trained for the household division because his father had always spoken about the honor of serving the crown in this capacity. Marcus watched as a young girl, maybe 7 years old, approached Private Thompson with her mother. The little girl waved shyly at the guard, and while Thompson didn't move or acknowledge her directly, Marcus noticed the almost imperceptible softening around his eyes that he had mistaken for weakness earlier. Now he understood it was actually kindness and humanity showing through professional discipline. He stands there every day, Colonel Whitfield said softly. It's not because he's been turned into some kind of emotionless robot, but because he chooses to honor his father's memory and serve something greater than himself. That takes more courage and character than most people possess. Marcus felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. His grand theory about breaking down the guard's facade had been completely wrong from the start. There was no facade to break, only genuine strength, dignity, and service. What should I do? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How can I make this right? Colonel Whitfield studied Marcus for a long moment. That's the first intelligent question you've asked. Today, son? The fact that you're asking it tells me there might be hope for you yet. The colonel glanced at his watch, then looked toward the guard post. Private Thompson's shift ends in 20 minutes. The changing of the guard ceremony will take place then. I suggest you stay and watch it properly this time, not as some kind of experiment or entertainment, but as what it actually is. A solemn ceremony honoring service and sacrifice. Marcus nodded eagerly. Yes, sir, I will. Is there anything else I can do? Any way to apologize? Actions speak louder than apologies, Colonel Whitfield replied. But there is something you might do that would be meaningful. Private Thompson has been trying to complete his university degree through correspondence courses, studying in his spare time. He's working toward a degree in education because he wants to become a teacher when his service is complete, following in his father's footsteps in a different way. His father was a teacher too? Marcus asked. Before he joined the military, yes. Sergeant Major Thompson taught primary school for 5 years before he enlisted. He always said that serving his country in the classroom was just as important as serving on the battlefield. Marcus felt another wave of emotion wash over him. Here was someone who had lost a father who was both a war hero and a dedicated teacher. And instead of being bitter or broken, he was trying to honor both aspects of his father's legacy. I could help him with his studies, Marcus offered tentatively. I mean, if you wanted help, I'm good at research and writing papers, and I have access to the university library. Colonel Whitfield's expression softened slightly for the first time during their conversation. Now that, he said, would be a worthy use of your education and your time. It's far better than trying to humiliate good people for your own entertainment. As they stood there watching Private Thompson maintain his professional stance, despite the emotional conversation happening just a few feet away, Marcus began to understand something profound about true strength and character. It wasn't about never feeling emotion or never being affected by circumstances. It was about choosing to do what was right and honorable regardless of how you felt. The 20 minutes until the changing of the guard felt both endless and too short for Marcus. He stood quietly beside Colonel Whitfield, no longer seeing the ceremony as entertainment, but beginning to understand its deeper meaning. Other tourists continued taking photos and chatting, but Marcus found himself studying every detail with new eyes. Tell me about the ceremony, Marcus said quietly to the colonel. I mean, really tell me about it. It's not the tourist version, but what it actually means. Colonel Whitfield seemed pleased by the question. Each movement has significance, he began. The precision isn't for show, it represents the discipline and dedication required to serve. The inspection of weapons isn't just tradition, it symbolizes the readiness to defend what matters. Every step, every gesture, every moment of the ceremony has been earned through months of training and years of commitment. As they watched, Marcus noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The way the guards maintained perfect synchronization. Not through mechanical repetition, but through mutual respect and teamwork. The care they took with their equipment, treating their rifles and uniforms as tools of honor rather than mere props. Private Thompson there, Colonel Whitfield continued, nodding toward the guard, practices these movements for hours every day. Not because he has to anymore, he's mastered them all, but because he understands that every tourist, every child, every visitor who sees him might have their only impression of British military service based on his performance. Marcus watched a group of school children gathering near the guard post, their teacher trying to keep them quiet and respectful. One little boy, maybe 6 years old, kept staring up at Private Thompson with wide, admiring eyes. Hey, my daddy's a soldier. 2, the boy whispered loudly to his teacher. Is that man like my daddy? The teacher smiled and nodded. Very much like your daddy, Tommy. He's protecting important things, just like your father does. Marcus felt his throat tighten again as he watched Private Thompson's subtle reaction to the boy's words. The guard couldn't acknowledge the child directly, but there was something in his posture that seemed to straighten even further with pride. He hears everything, Colonel Whitfield observed, noticing Marcus's attention. Every conversation, every comment, every child who says their parent is also in service, it affects him, but he channels that emotion into doing his job even better. The ceremony began precisely on time. Marcus watched in fascination as the new guard approached with military precision, every step measured and purposeful. The inspection ritual that he had once seen as boring pageantry now revealed itself as something much more meaningful. a passing of responsibility from one dedicated person to another. When Private Thompson was finally relieved of his post, Marcus expected him to simply walk away. Instead, the young soldier moved with the same careful precision he had maintained throughout his duty. Joining the formal ceremony of changing positions, "Now what happens?" Marcus asked quietly. "Now he goes through debriefing, equipment check, and then he's off duty until tomorrow," Colonel Whitfield explained. "If you're serious about your offer to help with his studies, this would be the time to make a proper introduction." Marcus felt nervous suddenly. What could he possibly say to make up for his behavior? How do you apologize to someone for treating them like an object of curiosity rather than a person worthy of respect? "I don't know what to say to him," Marcus admitted. "Start with honesty," Colonel Whitfield advised. "Tell him who you are, acknowledge what you did wrong, and offer your help without expecting forgiveness. Real apologies don't come with conditions attached." As the ceremony concluded and the tourists began to disperse, Colonel Whitfield approached one of the officers and spoke quietly with him. After a brief conversation, the officer nodded and gestured toward a side area where Marcus could see Private Thompson removing his ceremonial hat and speaking with other guards. "The officer will arrange a brief meeting if Private Thompson is willing," Colonel Whitfield told Marcus. "He's under no obligation to speak with you, and you must respect his decision either way." Marcus nodded, his heart pounding. This felt more nerve-wracking than any exam he had ever taken at university. After what felt like an eternity, the officer returned and gestured for Marcus to follow him. Private Thompson was sitting on a bench, looking much younger and more approachable without his formal uniform hat. His blonde hair was slightly flattened from wearing the heavy bearskin, and Marcus could see that he was indeed close to his own age. It's probably no more than 22 or 23. "Private Thompson," the officer said formally. "This young man has requested a moment of your time. You're under no obligation to speak with him." Thompson looked up at Marcus with clear, intelligent eyes. There was no anger or resentment in his expression, just quiet curiosity and perhaps a hint of wariness. "You're the student who was filming earlier," Thompson said. It wasn't a question. Clearly he had been aware of everything that had been happening during his duty hours. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice sounding smaller than he intended. "I came here today thinking I was conducting some kind of experiment, and I realize now how wrong and disrespectful that was. I treated you like a curiosity instead of a person, and I'm deeply sorry for that." Private Thompson studied Marcus for a moment before responding. "What kind of experiment?" Marcus took a deep breath and decided on complete honesty. "I thought I could make you break character. I had this theory that the stoic behavior was just an act, and I wanted to prove that everyone has a breaking point. I was completely wrong, and more than that, I was completely inappropriate." To Marcus's surprise, Private Thompson's mouth curved slightly in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You weren't the first to try, and you won't be the last, but you might be the first to come and apologize afterward." Marcus was surprised by Private Thompson's relatively relaxed response. He had expected anger, coldness, or at best, polite dismissal. Instead, the young soldier seemed genuinely curious about Marcus's motivation and apparently willing to have a conversation. "May I ask you something?" Marcus said carefully. "Colonel Whitfield told me about your father and about what you've been through. How do you do it? How do you stand there for hours dealing with people like me when you have so much else on your mind?" Private Thompson was quiet for a moment, looking out across the palace courtyard, where tourists were still milling about, taking photos and enjoying their day. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "My father used to say that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about," Thompson began. "When tourists try to make me laugh or get a reaction, I remember that they're just people trying to have fun or make memories. Even when they're being disrespectful, it usually comes from not understanding rather than from malice."
Oh.
Another pang of guilt, but also admiration for Thompson's perspective. "But surely some of it must get to you. Today alone, you had dozens of people treating you like an attraction in a theme park." Thompson smiled more broadly this time. "You want to know what really gets to me? It's not the tourists trying to make me laugh or the children making faces at me. It's the veterans who come by." "Veterans?" Confused. "Every few days an old soldier will come by. Someone who served in World War II or the Falklands or Iraq or Afghanistan. They don't try to get a reaction. They just stand there quietly for a minute, and then they give a small nod or a subtle salute. They know what this uniform represents, and they understand what we're doing here. Thompson's voice grew softer as he continued. Last month, an elderly man in a wheelchair came by. His grandson was pushing him, and I could see medals on his jacket. He sat there, watching me for about 10 minutes, not saying anything. When they were leaving, he called his grandson over and whispered something. The young man came back and said, "My grandfather wants you to know that you're doing your father proud." Marcus felt his eyes getting watery again. He knew about your father. Word gets around in military circles. My father made an impression on a lot of people. Thompson paused, then looked directly at Marcus. The point is, that old veteran understood something that most tourists don't. This isn't about being a statue or proving how tough we are. It's about honor, service, and carrying on a tradition that means something. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand. Colonel Whitfield mentioned that you're working on a university degree. Is that difficult to manage along with your duties here? Challenging, Thompson admitted. I study whenever I can during breaks, in the evenings, on weekends. I'm working toward a degree in education, hoping to teach primary school when my service is complete. Following in your father's footsteps, Marcus observed. In a way, yes. He always said that teaching children was another form of service too. The country. Help shape young minds. Give them good values. Show them how to be decent people. That's as important as any military service. Marcus took a deep breath and made his offer. Colonel Whitfield suggested that I might be able to help. You with your studies. I'm at London University, studying history and psychology. I have access to research materials, and I'm pretty good at writing papers and preparing for exams. If you'd be interested, I'd be honored to help. Thompson looked surprised. You do? That even though we just met and after, ... Well, after today. Especially after today, Marcus replied earnestly. No, I came here thinking I was so clever, so educated, so superior. But you've taught me more about character, dignity, and real strength in the past hour than I've learned in 3 years of university. The least I can do is put my education to good use, helping someone who deserves it. Thompson considered this for a moment. What's your area of focus in history? Modern British history, actually, 20th century military and social changes. I've written papers on both world wars, the evolution of the British military, social changes in post-war Britain. That would actually be incredibly helpful. Thompson said, his enthusiasm showing for the first time. I'm struggling with an essay on the social impact of World War II on British families. It's due next week, and I haven't had enough time to do proper research. Marcus felt a surge of excitement finally, a way to contribute something positive rather than just causing trouble. I know that topic inside and out. Wrote a 20-page paper on it last semester. I'd be happy to share my research and help you develop your own angle on the subject. You'd really do that? Thompson asked, still seeming somewhat amazed by the offer. It would be my pleasure, Marcus replied sincerely, and maybe you could teach me a few things too. About real service, about dignity under pressure, about what it means to honor something greater than yourself. Thompson stood up and extended his hand. I think that sounds like a fair exchange. I'm James Thompson, by the way. Friends call me Jamie. Marcus shook his hand warmly. Marcus Chen, and I hope I can earn the right to call you a friend. As they shook hands, Marcus realized that what had started as his worst day in recent memory was turning into one of his most meaningful. He had come to the palace thinking he would outsmart a royal guard, but instead he had been taught a lesson in humility, respect, and the true meaning of strength. Colonel Whitfield approached them as they were exchanging contact information. How did it go, gentlemen? It's better than I had any right to hope, Marcus replied honestly. Private Thompson, Jamie, has agreed to let me help with his studies. The colonel nodded approvingly. Excellent. Learning from each other, that's how real understanding happens. He turned to Thompson. Your father would be proud, son. It's not just of your service, but of your character and how you handled today's situation. Thompson's posture straightened slightly at the mention of his father. And Marcus could see how much those words meant to him. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same courtyard at Buckingham Palace, but everything had changed. This time, he wasn't there as a curious student trying to prove a point. He was there as a friend, watching Jamie receive a commendation for excellence in service. The ceremony was small and private, attended only by Jamie's fellow guards, a few officers, and the people who had become important to him during his service. Marcus felt honored to be included in such a significant moment. Over the past months, their unlikely friendship had grown into something neither of them had expected. Marcus had indeed helped Jamie with his university studies, providing research assistance, proofreading essays, and sharing study techniques. Jamie's grades had improved dramatically, and he was now on track to graduate with honors, but the teaching had gone both ways. Jamie had shown Marcus what real discipline looked like, not the forced kind that comes from rules and punishments, but the voluntary kind that comes from understanding purpose and commitment. He had taught Marcus about finding meaning in service to others, and about the quiet strength that comes from doing what's right, even when no one is watching. Marcus's own studies had been transformed by their friendship. His final thesis on the human face of military service, personal stories behind public duty, had earned him the highest marks of his academic career. But more importantly, it had been written with genuine understanding and respect rather than academic detachment. Jamie had also influenced Marcus's career plans. Originally planning to go into corporate psychology, Marcus had decided instead to pursue educational psychology. With hopes of eventually working with military families and helping children of service members cope with the unique challenges they faced. "You clean up pretty well for a former troublemaker," Jamie said, with a grin as he approached Marcus after the ceremony. He was out of his formal red uniform now, wearing dress blues that made him look even younger than usual. "You look very impressive with that commendation ribbon," Marcus replied. "Your father would be incredibly proud." Jamie's expression grew more serious, but warm. "I think he would be. And I think he'd be surprised by how this all turned out. Would have thought that someone trying to make me break character would end up becoming one of my closest friends?" Colonel Whitfield joined them, looking pleased with how the ceremony had gone. "Gentlemen, I have some news that might interest you both." Marcus and Jamie turned their attention to the colonel, curious about what he had to share. "Jamie, your request for assignment to the Education Corps has been approved. After you complete your degree next year, you'll be transferred to a position helping develop training programs for new recruits. You'll get to use both your military experience and your education degree." Jamie's face lit up with excitement. "Really? It's exactly what I was hoping for." Marcus the colonel continued, "I've spoken with some colleagues at the Ministry of Defense. They're looking for civilian consultants to help develop support programs for military families. Your academic background and your understanding of military culture make you an ideal candidate." Marcus was stunned. "You mean I could actually work with military families professionally? Help children and spouses cope with deployment and service challenges? That's something you'd be interested in pursuing?" Colonel Whitfield confirmed. "Your thesis caught the attention of some people in positions to make things happen." As they walked away from the palace together, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that autumn morning. When he had arrived with such foolish confidence and misguided intentions. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said to Jamie as they walked. "That first day, when I was making such an idiot of myself, did you ever want to just tell me off? Put me in my place?" Jamie laughed. "Honestly, I was just annoyed. Another tourist trying to be clever. But then I started listening to what you were saying, and I realized you weren't being mean-spirited. You were just misguided. Very misguided." Marcus agreed with embarrassment. "But then, when you started talking about guards missing family moments and sacrificing for duty, I could tell you were trying to understand something. Even if you were going about it all wrong. And when Colonel Whitfield told you about my situation, I watched your face change completely. That's when I knew you had the capacity to learn and grow." They stopped at a small cafe near the palace where they had met many times over the past months to study together. It had become their unofficial headquarters for Jamie's university work and their discussions about everything from military history to personal philosophy. "You know what the strangest part is?" Marcus said as they settled into their usual table by the window. I thought I was so smart that day. I had read all these books about psychology and human behavior, and I thought I understood how people worked. But I had never actually tried to understand any individual person. That's the difference between knowledge and wisdom, Jamie replied. Knowledge is knowing facts about psychology. Wisdom is understanding that every person you meet has their own story, their own struggles, their own reasons for being who they are. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. My psychology professors taught me about behavioral patterns and response mechanisms. But you taught me about empathy, respect, and real human connection. As they sat there watching tourists stream past on their way to and from the palace, Marcus thought about all the lessons he had learned from his friendship with Jamie. He had discovered that true strength wasn't about never showing emotion, but about choosing to do what's right regardless of how you feel. He had learned that real dignity comes from service to others rather than from proving your own cleverness. Most importantly, he had learned that every person deserves to be seen as a complete human being with their own story, rather than as an object of curiosity or entertainment. I have something for you, Jamie said, reaching into his bag and pulling out a small wrapped package. Thank you, gift, for all your help with my studies. Marcus opened the package carefully and found a framed photograph. It showed Jamie in his full ceremonial uniform, standing at attention at his post, but it wasn't a typical tourist photo. This picture had been taken during a moment when a small child had approached the guard post, and while Jamie maintained his professional stance, the photograph somehow captured the kindness and humanity in his eyes as he watched the child. The photographer was a friend of my father's, Jamie explained. He said this picture shows what my dad always talked about, the balance between duty and compassion. He thought you should have it because you helped me understand that balance better. Marcus was deeply moved by the gift. Jamie, this is incredible, but I should be giving you something. You're the one who taught me the real lessons. We taught each other, Jamie replied simply. That's what friends do. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Marcus looked back toward the palace where everything had begun. The afternoon guard shift was taking their positions, and tourists were already gathering to take photos and try their various tactics to get reactions from the stoic figures in red uniforms. Do you think any of those guards will have to deal with someone like me today? Marcus asked with a rueful smile. Probably, Jamie laughed. But maybe someday, one of those tourists will learn the same lesson you did. Maybe they'll realize that behind every uniform is a real person with a real story. And maybe, Marcus added hopefully, they'll be lucky enough to meet someone willing to teach them about respect and dignity, the way you taught me. As they walked away from the palace together, Marcus realized that his foolish attempt to outsmart a royal guard had led to the most important friendship of his life. He had come seeking to expose what he thought was weakness, but instead had discovered true strength. He had tried to break down someone's professional facade, only to learn about authentic character and genuine service. The student who had thought he was so clever had indeed been taught a lesson, just not the one he had expected to teach. And, in the process, both young men had found something far more valuable than academic knowledge or military discipline. They had found a friendship built on mutual respect, shared growth, and the understanding that everyone has something important to teach and something meaningful to learn. Years later, when Marcus would tell this story to the military families he counseled in his professional work, he would always end with the same lesson. Never assume you understand someone's story based on what you can see from the outside. Take the time to listen, to learn, and to show respect for the experiences that have shaped them. You might just discover that the person you thought you could teach has far more to offer you than you ever imagined.